Santa Claus knows whether you've been naughty or nice, and so does the federal government. Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we discuss this phenomenon. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show, as y'all know, that brings you the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy, the free society, free markets, limited government. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, and it's good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to all of y'all tuning in. Thank you for the great support you've given us over the years. You've kept shows like this going for 32 years. This is our end-of-year fundraising time, as y'all no doubt know. We could greatly appreciate your support. We get donations all year long, but it's in December that we get most of the resources to carry us on for the coming year. And so if you like our work, I hope you'll consider donating to us. If you've already sent your end-of-year donation to us, thank you so much. You'll be getting your letter in the mail if you haven't already gotten it. Keep in mind that Freedom Club members get, for $250 or more, you get a personal video from me every month. And for you, those of you that have been supporting us, I hope you'll renew us. All right, Richard. Well, it's Christmas time, and this is Santa Claus time. So I thought this would, you got a Christmas tree in the background. Thank you for pointing that out. I guess you're trying to overcome the image you have in the libertarian movement of bah humbug. But I mean, it is Santa Claus time. And so that reminds us of the federal government, because let's face it, the federal government is like a Santa Claus, but all year long. I mean, look what it does for people. It brings them presents all year long. It brings us stimulus checks and Social Security payments and Medicare and Medicaid and farm subsidies and education grants. I mean, Santa Claus even visits foreign countries, and we see that in the form of foreign aid, where they give all this money away to foreign dictators and others around the world. I mean, that's really what the federal government has turned into, Richard. With the massive welfare state we have, it's turned into a Santa Claus, or maybe a parent, or even a god. I mean, that provides all these things, and people. I mean, they essentially pray to the federal government. I mean, they worship it. I mean, this is their everything. This provides their retirement and their health care and so forth. And it's created this mindset of dependency on this Santa Claus. How many Americans, have you ever heard that say, oh my gosh, if we didn't have the federal government, people would be dying in the streets. They'd be dying of starvation and illness. And thank goodness for this wonderful Santa Claus or parent or God that gives us our retirement and our health care and our education and our food and our housing and so forth. I mean, it's really a repugnant system we got here, Richard. And I think it's important to remind everyone that not entirely in American history have Americans turned to the federal government to be their Santa Claus. That for the first 125 years or so, there was none of this Santa Claus business. The purpose of the federal government was very limited. There was no income tax. There was no IRS. People kept everything they earned. They decided what to do with it. So that charity, which is what really Christmas is partly all about, was entirely voluntary. That people gave to causes out of the goodness of their hearts because they believed that this was something they wanted to assist with. And this is how churches got built, and museums and opera houses and theaters and so forth. But in the 20th century, Americans lost their faith in that kind of system. They lost their faith in themselves. They lost their faith in freedom. They lost their faith in the concept of voluntary charity, so that now we're living under this system of really a Santa Claus who can be very vicious. I mean, if you look at the IRS, if you don't pay your taxes to this Santa Claus, he will come after you big time. And so it's kind of like a weird situation. We here at Christmas time, we want to be thankful for all the blessings, But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that we're living under a really evil, crooked, corrupt, immoral system. What do you think?
He knows when you are sleeping. He knows if you're awake. He knows if you've been good or bad, so be good for goodness sake. And that's the modern paternalistic government we live under. In fact, it's not a metaphor. Through surveillancing and droning, our father government watches over each and every one of us. And in fact, globally. And sometimes we're nice and the government gives us all these free goodies. Sometimes we're naughty and they drop bombs on you in other places around the world, which is meant to teach you a lesson. So this is basically the Santa Claus that we have. But notice a few things, to follow through with this. First of all, when do people usually, excuse me, really believe that there's a Santa Claus? When they're little kids, when they're open to the impressions of magical and imaginary things. Yes, Santa lives in the North Pole. Santa somehow has all of these resources with the free labor of all of these elves to construct during the year all of the toys and presents that he's going to bring to you if you've been a good boy or girl. Of course, that's assuming that we still think in terms of two genders, but and that all of this is free, and he does it all miraculously in one night around the entire world, coming down a chimney. What is it that children usually discover? It depends upon the age and family circumstances, but eventually the kid discovers there is no Santa Claus. That Santa Claus is really mom and dad, and it isn't for free. They have worked and saved and put an effort and gone shopping, and they've trimmed the tree and they put the wrap presents under the tree, and really they're the Santa Clauses. And this is what people don't understand about government. Government has no resources. It has no goodies to redistribute other than what it takes from others that the others have actually produced through work, savings, and investment and effort and initiative. And that what the government seems to be giving for free is actually taken from others. But whereas your parents choose to follow the little fantasy when you're a little kid and create this illusion, and they voluntarily and freely and with love and affection choose to do these things for you, the government has no love and affection for you. This is empty and false rhetoric. I feel your pain, as Jimmy Carter once said, or I care about your needs and I just want to give back, so please elect me. So basically, this is a false imagery of even Santa Claus. And the idea that it's free, that it's through love and affection. This is basically those who gain political power in modern times through our corrupted political process of elections, and then take from some to redistribute to others based upon the coalitions of special interest groups that have succeeded in supporting the winning candidate as opposed to the candidates that lost. And that this is the imagery that we have as if we're perpetual children looking to a real Santa who doesn't live in the world on the North Pole, but lives in Washington, D.C. in the White House, and he's going to take care of you. I mean, just look at the latest Santa, the Santa that now occupies the Oval Office, Joe Biden. Oh, I'll see that the supply side chains are taken care of. Oh, I'll see that we have a green environment because I'll tell people what cars to build, and I'm going to have the electric powered way stations to recharge your electric car, and I'm going to tell people how to live and how they can heat their homes and how they can go to work, and I'm going to tell them all to be vaccinated. And if all the employees in private companies are not vaccinated, I'm going to do bad things to the bosses. This is the imagery of the real Santa that we have. And it is the illusion that needs to be broken. Just like the little kid has to learn that there isn't a Santa when he's, 3, 4, 5 years old, whatever. People need to wake up that this is basically some people gaining political power, which gives them the legitimized authority to seize that which you or others have honestly and peacefully earned, and then give it to those that the politicians believe are more deserving for various ideological and politically motivated purposes, and to destroy the structure of incentives and properly motivated charity and the workings of a free society. And in fact, makes it a living hell rather than a happy occasion, such as Christmas morning usually is for the little kids. And that's what we need to awaken people to. Yes, Virginia, there is no Santa Claus.
Yeah, there's another aspect of that is how there's this mindset among supporters of the welfare state that if you oppose this kind of system like you and I do, that you're a bad person, that you don't care about people, that you just would rather just see people dying in the streets and dying of starvation. And it's a weird mindset, because really what it's saying is that people have to be coerced to do these things. Because if you have our kind of system, a system where everybody's free to make the choices on charity that they want, well, you and I have the belief that most people will help out others in need. Not everyone, but most people do. In other words, we're not afraid of that free society. It's a society where people keep everything they earn, and there's no mandatory charity at all, no Social Security, no Medicare, Medicaid, public housing, food stamps, foreign aid, anything like that. No transfer programs, mandatory transfer programs. Well, I have absolutely no doubt that there would be nobody dying in the streets, that when people are free to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth, most of them do help out others. Or if somebody needs an education, there's people that fund scholarship drives and stuff. People are donating all the time to worthy causes, even considering the fact that the government's taking so much money from them, they still donate what's remaining, a large portion of what's remaining in their savings, to good causes or their income. So when you move over to this other system where the government's forcing people to do these things, and make no mistake about it, taxation is based on force. It's not the IRS coming to you and saying, would you please donate, like the Salvation Army person at the grocery store is. You can walk away from him and nothing bad's going to happen to you. But you walk away from the IRS and you say, I'm not going to give anymore, they will do bad things to you. They will harass you. They will persecute you. They will put liens on your property. They will foreclose those liens. They'll throw you out of your house or your business. And in the extreme case, they will put you in jail, as they did with the noted tax resistor Irwin Schiff. When Schiff ended up getting cancer in jail, he asked for an early release. All he had done was publish books advising people not to pay income taxes. And they were brutal. They said, no, you're going to die in prison. And they made him die in prison. This is not a nice, benevolent, kind of Christmas-like organization. This is a very vicious organization, and it's supported by the members of Congress because they understand that if the IRS doesn't do its job, they don't get the credit for all that largesse that's being distributed to people. But I don't see how people that support the system can reconcile this system with any sense of morality. I mean, who are the moral actors in this whole scenario? Is the IRS agent acting morally when he's out doing these kind of things? Is the federal prosecutor who's putting people in jail? Is it the jailer who's causing Irwin Schiff to lie there and die of cancer in a penitentiary? Is he the moral person? Is it the members of Congress? What about those of us out here? Are we considered moral people because we live under this system? Do we have to vote to be considered moral? Do we have to vote for people that support the system? What if we vote for libertarians? Are we considered immoral then because we're opposing this system? So it's a weird, corrupting system, Richard. But at its basic form, it really corrupts the whole idea of morality and charity, because the only way that a person really can be considered doing something morally and charitably is if he is choosing voluntarily to take a certain course of action or not to take a certain course of action. When he's forced into that position by the government, or even when he's manipulated into making that decision by the government, that's not a free, unencumbered choice. And so morality can only mean not at the point of a gun, but the freely choosing individual, which is one of the big reasons why you and I favor a free society. That is, a society where people are free to accumulate wealth and decide for themselves what to do with no mandatory charity whatsoever.
See, one of the tragedies of this ideological process is that it has driven down an Orwellian memory hole, an understanding of the actual history of charity and benevolence and philanthropy under liberty, especially in that particularly economically freer and freer century, the 19th century, usually condemned as this evil century of laissez-faire. And in fact, was the century that once the government, particularly in a country like Great Britain, had narrowly reduced their earlier version of a welfare state known as the poor law system that had begun under Elizabeth I, several hundred years earlier. The free society blossomed with philanthropic endeavors. Maybe, I'm sure most viewers or listeners are familiar with Cadbury chocolate. They always come out with those Easter eggs at Easter time, the chocolate Easter eggs. Or Lever Brothers, that is the makers of soap. Both of these private organizations set up charitable endeavors for their workers and for extended groups in the areas in which they worked. Private charities in the 19th century. Organizations like the Salvation Army, which you mentioned, emerged in the middle and late decades of the 19th century as a charitable endeavor. Those who had become financially successful out of the economic growth of the Industrial Revolution, often guided by their religious faith, endowed charities that built hospitals, orphanages, educational institutions for those who did not have the financial means to take care of these things on their own. There emerged voluntary associations of mutual assistance for medical expenses, for retirement expenses, burial costs when a breadwinner had passed away, and where would the remaining family get the money to put to rest the family member who had died. These were called the friendly societies in Great Britain. And to show you an idea of the degree of such private sector philanthropy, the famous British economist, William Stanley Jevons, one of the early formulators of what we call marginal utility theory, called for the end to private philanthropy and generosity and a growth of government redistribution of wealth, not because he felt that, oh, the private sector is too stingy, there's not enough senses of betterment for fellow men. He complained that the private sector was excessively generous and that the benevolent giving of the private sector was undermining incentives to get a job for people to work. So the purpose of replacing private charity with the government was to limit the amount of charity that would be redistributed so as not to undermine people's self-interested incentives. Like, that's the exact opposite of the vision that we have today of a stinginess, a greediness, an insensitivity to one's fellow man. In the free, relatively economically free society of the 19th century, when the government controls, restrictions, prohibitions, excessive tax and regulatory burdens were lifted in many ways, particularly in a country like Great Britain or the United States, what you saw was the blossoming of the spirit of community, this blossoming sense of individual benevolence and responsibility in a right and proper sense for one's fellow man who had fallen upon hard times, not of their own making. And that was undermined by the growth of the welfare state. Because once the first in Germany in the late 19th century and then Britain emulating the Germans in the first decade of the 20th century with, quote, the first steps towards national free healthcare. How do you get people to give voluntary contributions or to belong to voluntary associations for mutual assistance when the government is taxing the society as a whole and giving things away for free? How do you compete against free? So in fact, once these government coerced programs began to be implemented, it undermined and undercut the ability of the private sector charities to economically be viable any longer. So it wasn't due to the selfishness and the greed and the narrow-mindedness of the private sector. It's the fact that basically government giving away things for free crowded out what had been an extremely successful and vibrant private sector philanthropy, charity, good works that had blossomed in the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And that's the history of the real private sector's achievements, besides when we think of narrowly the profit motives of the marketplace, that government education is basically snuffed out with its official propagandistic notion of the evils of capitalism and laissez-faire and the benevolence and good works of government.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the same thing was happening over here when the Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville came to visit America. He was talking about all of the charitable activity in America. He was astounded by it because there was just so much of it going on. And if you look at the period from around 1870, about 5 years after the Civil War ended, to around 1910, it is really the most remarkable period in history, all of history, not just U.S. history, in terms of the standard of living of people. It was just soaring. I mean, if I had to choose a time in history where I would live, it would be right at this period of time. Now, obviously, they don't have the things that we have today, air conditioned and so cars and so forth. But in terms of economic liberty, there's no question but that this was the freest period in history. You've got no income tax, no IRS, no Federal Reserve, no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, no national security state, no Pentagon, CIA, NSA, FBI, no DEA, Departments of Labor, Agriculture, Energy, Education, et cetera, et cetera. It was a truly remarkable period. People and open immigration. There was still open immigration. They had passed or what was it? The Exclusion Act that targeted some Chinese, but fairly minuscule in the larger scheme of things. It was a remarkable period. People were free to accumulate unlimited amounts of wealth, and there were people getting extremely wealthy. John D. Rockefeller was the wealthiest man in history, and yet he was giving away untold amounts of money in terms of building things like, hospitals and museums and so forth. When people were free to accumulate wealth, they gave a lot of it away, not by mandate, not because of an income tax deduction, but because there was no income tax, but because they wanted to do that. The poor were getting rich. People were flooding in from Europe and Asia, the lands where government takes care of people, to come to a land where government was prohibited from taking care of anyone. And they were going from rags to riches, if not in one generation, 2 or 3 generations. They were saving money. They were putting it away. They were passing it on to their children, and who would then pass it on to the next generation. It was an incredible period of time, and inventions were coming into existence every day. I mean, imagine, the automobile and the electric light bulb. I mean, it had to be a tremendously exciting period of time. But everything changed. I mean, when they ended up abandoning that system in favor of the welfare state, we end up with the system that we're living under today. I mean, look where the national debt is now, $29 trillion and climbing. You've got massive debasement of the currency. That was the other thing about that period of time I talked about. They used gold coins and silver coins as the official money. Now we live under this paper money standard where they're printing money like there was no tomorrow. And it's not going to end well, this whole system. But they don't have a choice, Richard. To keep this system going, they have to keep printing this money. They got to keep debasing the currency. They have to keep building debt on top of debt in order to try to keep people happy and try to hope that the system doesn't collapse tomorrow, and that they keep delaying the collapse for as long as they can. And to me, it's just a question of time when that collapse comes. So I think Americans have a choice at this point, Richard. I mean, what do we want going forward? This is a good time to do some soul searching because there's no big crisis going on. Yeah, I know there's the pandemic, but there's not this massive crisis going on like 9/11 or something like that where rational thinking is thrown out the window. Today, people are engaged in some rational thinking, and this is the time to do some soul searching when you've got people engaged in rational thinking. What do you want as a country? What do you want for yourself? You want this kind of life where the government's your Santa Claus and it can be a very vicious Santa Claus? Or do you want to go back and look at some sound founding principles? And I'm not suggesting that there weren't some bad founding principles of this country. We all know there were, slavery and so forth. But in terms of the good founding principles, I say that's what we need in this country, is a great awakening to saying, you know what? Those generations that abandoned those good founding principles were wrong. And it's time to move in the direction of restoring those good founding principles, among which are a limited government republic and economic liberty.
To give you the idea of how quickly things did change, I'm not sure how many viewers or listeners may be familiar with the name of James Bryce. He later became Lord Bryce, famous British political analyst. He came to the United States for the first time in the early 1880s. and then delivered a monograph on looking at what America was like in the eyes of people like the founding fathers and de Tocqueville compared to what it was then in the 1880s. And what struck him is he said, well, let's look at the arguments of the Federalists. The people who wrote the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, versus the anti-Federalists, those who were concerned about concentration of power under that proposed new Constitution. And he said, well, here's the case that the Federalists had made for a new Constitution. Here were the concerns that the anti-Federalists had about a new Constitution that got implemented in 1789, 1790, with Washington as the first president. Who was right in terms of what America now has been for a little over or almost a century since the U.S. Constitution was implemented? And from the perspective of 1882, James Bryce says, well, the anti-federalists were wrong. They set up this new Constitution, the United States Constitution, with a presidential system, a Congress, and look, rights are, yes, there was a concentration of power and overreach during the Civil War and a terrible destruction in the battles of the Civil War, but now it's 1880s. The states basically have their rights. The power is decentralized. The Congress respects the checks and balances as the executive. The government expenditure is within very narrow bounds. There's a sound monetary system. The gold standards we returned to after the Civil War. Well, the Federalists were right, and the Anti-Federalists were just exaggerated in the concerns of, concentrated power that will end liberty in America. But then Bryce went on in the 1890s to write his most famous book called The American Commonwealth. It's a 2-volume study of American constitutional order and life in America. But he then put out a revised second edition of it around 1910, 1912. And now he has to say, America is changing. But since the 1890s to the 1910s, the central government has been growing. Regulatory agencies are being introduced. Taxes are going up. Freedom gave the Americans all this prosperity. And now they see pockets of despair and economic inequality, and they've become impatient. And they want government to end these pockets of disappointment, and they've turned towards a paternalism. So just in a matter of about a 20-year span, America went from that ideal of those sound principles of the founding fathers, which had been enduring, Bryce said, looking at the America after he had visited it in the early 1880s. Yet a mere 20 years later or so, he's now looking at America and the welfare interventionist state is occurring because of a change of mindset, a lack of patience and confidence in liberty for continual prosperity and improvement in eliminating the remaining pockets of economic hardship, poverty, and so on, to this impatience. Well, we're so wealthy, let's turn to the state to make it good for all. And that, of course, we know has become the benchmark of a belief of paternalism solving all of our problems. Even when poverty in America, compared to other countries, and certainly historically in terms of the human race, virtually does not exist anymore in the United States. All of this talk about inequity and inequality is absurd. You ask yourself, what is the difference between you and some of the wealthiest people in the world? They have a nicer car than you, but you have a car. They have a slightly bigger screen television than you, but you have a flat screen TV at your home. You have electricity, you have central heating, you have air conditioning. You have the ability to save and travel and go on vacations and enjoy the amenities of the world. You can go to nice restaurants the way even only the most wealthiest of people could do so 100 years ago, 200 years ago. The notion of this great disparity of economic inequality is absurd because the country has become bountifully wealthy. And as the old phrase goes, a rising tide lifts all boats, even if some boats in the rising tide are a little higher than others. We have no economic inequality in any meaningful historical sense. And that has been due to the continuing degrees of economic liberty and opportunity that has created the incentives and the resources to keep making us a wealthier society in all economic, cultural, and social facets and forms of our daily life. And that is what people don't understand. And this idea of continuing to want government to play Santa Claus, to do this and to do that, is in fact not only setting out wrong signals of what a free person should be expected to be concerned with, but is undermining the very vibrancy and incentives and institutions to keep that prosperity growing.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap it up by saying it boggles the mind to think what would have happened if the welfare warfare state had never been adopted. If we had stayed on that trajectory that we were on from 1870 to 1900 or so, where economic liberty prevailed, the standard of living of people today would be phenomenal. If all that money had not been seized, that potential capital by the government for the welfare state and the warfare state, the standard of living of people, especially at the bottom of the economic ladder, would be 100 times bigger than what it is today. So on that note, Richard, we got to wrap it up. We're out of time, but thank you. And thank you all very much for tuning in. Thank you for your support. Again, this is our end-of-year fundraising time. I hope you'll consider making an end-of-year donation if you haven't already done so. If you have, thank you so much. We're very appreciative. And if you've supported us in the past, I hope you'll renew your support. And Richard, greatly enjoyed the show. We're not going to be talking to you next week. We'll be with you 2 weeks from now. But I wish you again, Richard, a very Merry Christmas, and I wish everybody tuning in a very Merry Christmas.
And I'll just add here that there's no better source of the fight for freedom than the Future of Freedom Foundation. And for you to think about sharing some generosity and benevolence with the efforts of Jacob Hornberger and the others affiliated with FFF to continue the advancement of these ideas, because these ideas are needed more today than for a very long time. And I will just want to add with Jacob my best and warmest wishes for a Merry Christmas and a most Happy New Year, and see you in 2022.
All right. With that note, we'll wrap it up. Thanks so much again.